Welcome to Grade Fun. Yeah! So today, I'm gonna hit you with a rendering video. Ouch. It's all graphite, all pencil. Before I start with that, I want to shout out Blackwing pencils.
Blackwing.
One of my most favorite pencils on the planet. And also, I want to give a shout out to all my YouTube subscribers.
What up, y'all?
Good looking out. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Grady Fun, on Instagram at Grady Fun, on Facebook at guess what?
Come on, guess it.
Come on, guess. Come on, guess.
Yeah.
Grady Fun. Okay, that was really funny, but I thought it was funny. So, when we talk about rendering, we want to think about our basic foundation elements. So we want to think about our highlight, we want to think about our core shadow, and for me, I like to simplify it. So when I have those two elements, I want to think about transition into the light, transition into the shadow, so that it mentally simplifies everything. So once you hit the core shadow and you know where your highlight is, now it's a matter of trying to isolate the value transitions on either side of the core shadow. So that core shadow being effectively where light no longer continues, and so you're moving into the absence of light, which is the shadow side, which is the dark side. No, not good. No, that joke doesn't even work in person. Like when you making that joke in a demo in front of people, like in a class, it's a head shaker. Like, no. But anyway, rendering value is an act of patience. There is no real secret to rendering value other than having an insane amount of patience. In the video, this looks really fast, but this video not sped up is about an hour plus, and that little shader ball is super tiny. So you see the note here that I put where, you know, there's an arrow for where the highlight is, and then there's an arrow that wraps around that shows that you need to try to get the volume of the sphere. And so you want to be able to think about, how do I apply the same logic when I do, let's say, a sphere or a cylinder onto other things that I might want to render. So oftentimes when you see demonstrations, I mean, you'll see like the render on the shader ball, which is cool, which you can practice, which you might become really good at. But when you start thinking about, how do I apply that to something else, especially when you deal with something like this character I quickly sketched up, because eventually I want to do like a little watercolor paint. If you're not checking out the watercolor paintings, they're nearly daily watercolor paints. Sometimes I start them in the car when I'm waiting for my kids, just so I have something to do and to keep the skill sharp. But you got to keep the skill sharp, like a pencil, sharp, like a shooter. Ooh, wait, that's bad. I should edit that out. I'm not gonna edit that out. So if you look at the rendering here, you'll see that there's a lot of trying to think about where the highlight is, and then working from the core shadow into the shadow side, and then back in towards the light side. And truthfully, that's really all you really effectively need to do. The challenge is to control yourself so you don't start to make everything gray. Because I think that's always the danger of dealing with value, is that your inclination is to go too dark, too soon, and then make everything gray to compensate. So you have to be mindful of, and sometimes I'll render those little spheres on the page to help me remember where my light source is coming from, just so I don't lose sight of, man, I'm gonna go too far and end up just having a super light side and then a super dark side. So always keep in mind though, when you're rendering value and you get on the shadow side, that there's always just a little bit of light in that shadow side. That's that reflected light, that's that bounce light. I mean, that's that great, is it cosmological question? You know, is there always a little bit of light? Even in the darkest of persons, the darkest of soul, there's still some sort of light, some redemption. Anyway, when you're working with something really stylized, that's when it becomes really, really difficult, because this character or portrait or weird face, I mean, there's a lot of graphic stylization, so there's a lot more time spent figuring out what do I want to be really dimensional versus things that I can compromise and say, I'm okay with leaving that a little bit flatter. So you'll see again around the lips, there's a really strong core shadow, especially around the bottom part of the lips. And then you'll see on the face of the lip, most of that I made that a fairly solid value. But on the really specific volumetric areas, like around that muzzle area on the lips and around the bottom part of that chin, you know, core shadow, transition into the shadow, and then back into the light. And so that's, I mean, that's at its most basic, that's all you're kind of wrangling with when you're rendering value, at least. And those same exact concepts eventually trickle into when you're painting, that you're trying to just deal with the addition of color, but you're also just asking yourself, is this in light or is it in the dark? And then effectively rendering your transitions in relationship to that. So to be quite honest, there's some pauses in this video because I was multitasking. I was rendering and I was watching anime at the same time. So there's some pauses in there because there is no paint to dry. It's pencil. You don't have to wait for anything. I thought about editing it out, but it gave me some time to jabber, so I decided, hey, leave it in there and just jabber along. So you can see on the nose is a slightly different situation than the sphere because it's more of a planar object. But a lot of times I'll treat it in a very similar way because most of the time noses are not like boxes. They don't have super planes, meaning that the transition for noses are often still a little bit more gradual. So you go around the top plane and then you come around the side plane. So there's oftentimes going to be a core shadow that runs across that. So you'll still have like a light side, core shadow transition, and then go into the shadow side. And then it's a matter of how much reflected light do you want to bounce up against that nose. And I mean, after a while, it's all you just deciding, how much rendering do I really want to do? And it really is about restraint. So I've probably said it a couple times. It's preventing yourself from graying everything out. Because rendering value, it's about contrast. And at the end of the day, in any sort of art, animation, design, it's always about contrast and creating degrees of contrast. And that really is up to you and how well you want something to read, how strong you want it to read, and where you want the eye to gravitate. So the greater the contrast is, the more your eye is going to gravitate to that area. So if you're rendering value and you want somebody to look at a specific area, like you really want to work the light and dark range in there, because your eye is going to instantly say, ooh, look at all the values in there. I see all the rich darks. I need to be in that rich dark area. I don't know what the accent was. It was really bad. I do need an accent though. I'm gonna get one. I don't think you could buy one. I'm gonna practice one. So when you see value-wise, at this point, I mean, it's there's nothing that magical that you're really doing here. At this point, all you're doing is just reminding yourself, hey, don't go crazy with the value. I mean, there's some things that do have a local value because their color is naturally darker and the value of the color is darker than other things. So the skin tone of this character, I'd have to have some sort of idea of how dark the skin tone would be in order to really effectively render the value transition. But with the hair, I mean, for the most part, like I'm visualizing that the dreads on this character will probably be a really dark color, so they'd be like a deeper brown, which value-wise is not going to be won't have the same value range as, you know, like the little beads on there. Those are going to be a little bit more of a creamy sort of color. So value-wise, there's probably going to be a greater range in values in the creamier sort of beads than there would be value transitions in the hair. Unless the hair has lots of oils and grease in it, it'll probably get like some really strong spots of highlights, stuff of that nature. But you can see like this highlights in the eyes and what those look like. So that's value rendering. If you have any questions, hit me in the comments. If there's anything that you're interested in, let me know. Grade A fun. Boom.